I have to start with this. We're going to talk about politics today, but our thoughts and our hearts are with the people who were so tragically killed last night trying to land at Reagan Airport and the pilots of that helicopter. Anyway, good morning and a non-sunny welcome to our annual Warschaw Conference, which will focus on what happened in the 2024 election, what the return of Donald Trump means for the future of our politics, our country, and our world. As I think back on the campaign, think about the transition, and think about the first 2 weeks of this new administration, I am tempted to paraphrase Bette Davis in that great film, All About Eve. Buckle your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy ride. We are thrilled that once again, we are sponsoring today's conversations in partnership with POLITICO, and we're grateful to Margaret Hoover and Firing Line on PBS, which will televise 2 of our sessions. In addition, 2 other sessions are being broadcast on C-SPAN. The history of this conference stretches back even before the creation of the center to the aftermath of the 2016 campaign. I'm thrilled to see students and members of the USC community here again, so many others from beyond the university's gates, and the members of our Board of Counselors and Center Leadership Circle who helped to sustain our work and advance our mission. A special shout out to high school teacher Joel Snyder, who has brought 29 students from his AP Government and Politics class from the Anemo Pat Brown Charter High School in South Los Angeles. I expect this will be an insightful and exciting event, and I have to add, I do hope the excitement takes the right form. Here at the center, we are committed to a civil discourse where we respect each other and we respect the truth. Any disruption that violates that standard is unacceptable. Anyone who engages in that kind of disruption will be asked to leave. And to help them on their way out, we will happily provide an escort from the Department of Public Safety. There is an approved protest area in Crocker Plaza. The center is proud to be part of USC's Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. And I'm now privileged to introduce the interim dean of Dornsife, Mo El-Naggar. He is the dean's, wait till you hear this title. He is the dean's professor in physics and astronomy and professor of physics, biological sciences, and chemistry. That's pretty good. Mo and his interdisciplinary group have conducted path-breaking research with fundamental implications for cell physiology, biofuels, and environmental remediation. We are grateful for his strong commitment to the center. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Mo El-Naggar.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bob. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our annual Warschaw Conference on Practical Politics. First, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Hope Warschaw. Hope's vision and support for events like this has been key to USC's rise as a national leader in practical politics. Hope and her family recognized long ago that universities should provide environments where challenging, respectful conversations can help us grapple with what happens in the political arena. So even in this quiet year, I'm confident that everyone here is going to find a lot to talk about today. I also want to thank our partners today, POLITICO, C-SPAN, and PBS's Firing Line with Margaret Hoover. Your collaboration on this event not only expands our reach, it also helps us demonstrate the value of bringing academic expertise into the public dialogue. I also can't overstate the outstanding leadership of our 2 co-directors of the Center for the Political Future, Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy, as well as Executive Director Kami Arafan and the dedicated staff members at CPF who helped put all of this together today. So a quick hand of applause for them. I will say this is a bittersweet Warschaw Conference. As some of you may know, and I don't want to embarrass Bob here, but as some of you may know, Bob will be retiring later this year. We are so grateful for his dedication to creating this unique intellectual environment in the college that draws on his unmatched experience in the DC trenches. It's been a tremendous journey, and Bob, we wish you well in everything that comes next. We still expect you to show up to future events like this, though, so we'll expect you to be here next year. So to put it mildly, I think we find ourselves in an interesting moment. It's hard to believe that it's only been 10 days since President Trump was inaugurated for a second term, a political comeback that will definitely shape the trajectory of American politics for years to come. But this isn't just about the election, it's also a cultural reckoning. We are really pressed to understand how America is changing. We're asking what it means for our institutions, our relationships, our values, and in a nation that is extremely polarized, where do we go from here? Heavy questions. I think we could spend months or years trying to get to the bottom of it all. But I don't think that we have time to lean on a rock with our chin on our fist and just wait, right? I think we have to have these conversations. Unlike the previous Trump administration, it appears that this one is pushing through very, very quickly with their agenda with an unprecedented velocity. It doesn't seem like this time we will be waiting on Infrastructure Week for the next 4 years. Things are moving a little bit faster this time. So as the election suggests, a large segment of our country is very enthusiastic about the sweeping changes that are underway. And at the same time, many others are concerned. Democracy has never been perfect. We all know this. It's always been a work in progress. It takes compromise, vigilance, but also willingness to have direct conversations with each other that challenge us to think differently, and that's what today is about. That's why we're bringing academics, policymakers, pundits, and civic and business leaders. That's why this is so important. And I'm confident that all of this will reinforce the fact that we all have a role to play. So while we know that democracy is messy, trust those of us who've grown up without strong institutions and democracy. The alternative is not an alternative at all. So let's dive in. Thank you to all of our panelists participating today for being here, and to all of you, both on person and watching online, for joining us. Now let's welcome Bob Shrum back to the stage to introduce our first panel. Thank you all for being here.
We actually have 2 more preliminaries before we get to the first panel. But first, thank you, Mo. Thank you for those generous comments about my time here at USC. And thank you to this world-leading university for giving me a wonderful decade of teaching and leadership. I was actually inaugurated as the Warschaw Chair in this very room. And yes, if asked, I will return next year to be a panelist at the Warschaw Conference. I also want to join the Dean in paying tribute to Hope Warshaw for all she's done to make this event possible. Now let me introduce Julia Marsh, Editorial Director for California POLITICO, our partner in sponsoring this conference today. Julia?
Hi, and thanks, Bob. I'll be quick because I know we're all eager to get to the conversation. I do want to echo Bob's condolences to the victims of the horrific crash in DC late last night. I also would like to pay our respects to the fire victims and extend our gratitude to the first responders, and say thanks to many dedicated Angelenos like yourselves. I'm confident that the city will rebuild and have a bright future. As for the programming, though it's meaningful for this city as well, I wanted to share something Politico founder John Harris told our newsroom earlier this week. He said, "The next 4 years will be among the most important, and as we rise to the occasion, the most exhilarating chapters of our professional lives." I know many of you here today share that sentiment, no matter your political leaning. As Bob said, I'm the editorial director for Politico California, leading our expansion across this great state. We've repeatedly heard from our leaders, often the people making the news, that they're hungry for more informed and informative coverage that reflects the state's prominent place in the nation and around the globe. So we've set out to do just that and have quickly become the go-to place for sophisticated coverage of politics and policy. I'm proud to say that ours is a rare good news story in a time of contraction for the media industry. We've nearly tripled the size of our California bureau over the past 2 years, and we plan to continue that growth, including right here in Los Angeles. Our California journalists do the same thing that their Washington counterparts do, just from the opposite coast. They deliver distinctive reporting that pulls back the curtain on the dynamics at play around the state and the central characters in its political and policy drama. 3 of our top journalists from across the newsroom are on panels today: Jonathan Martin, Chris Cadelago, and Sasha Eisenberg. They are among the best political reporters in the country, so get ready for some very exciting conversation. If you're not already, please sign up for our Playbook newsletters. There are QR codes on the tables around the conference, and become Politico Pro subscribers to go deep into policy coverage on everything from technology, healthcare, education, energy, and beyond. Thanks, and back to you, Bob.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Politico. I do have to say I am not exhilarated by the prospect of the next 4 years. Our first panel today will air as an episode of Firing Line on PBS with Margaret Hoover. We need approximately 5 or 6 minutes to set the stage, and I will then introduce the panel. Don't all create chaos in the meantime. Just patiently sit, wait, have a sip of coffee. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
I know, I was kind of away for a while.
All right, there we go. There's the mic. Well, my most impressive and important credential here is I am a proud alum of the University of Southern California. So fight on, everybody. Fight on to the Trojans in the house. It is great to be here in Town and Gown, one of the most beautiful places on campus, the place where I decided to come to USC when the marching band was coming in and Pete Carroll was here, and I said, this is where I want to be, and I'm so excited to be here today. And one more note and background on me. I anchor the local news here at 5, 6, and 10 on Fox 11, host a statewide show called The Issue Is. And where we got the name The Issue Is, I don't know if I've told this story before, was because my hero in broadcasting was Tim Russert, who Betsy worked with and was the EP of. And he used to start his show every Sunday with "Our Issues This Sunday." So I couldn't take the name Meet the Press because they already have that. But I said, let me do something in naming the show to honor Tim. And so when I think of The Issue Is, I think of Tim and I think of Betsy and her great work, the greatest Sunday show in the history of our medium. So we have Betsy to thank for that, and thank you all for being here today. So just want to introduce our panel real quickly and then get into it. Chris Cadelago is the Sacramento Bureau Chief for Politico, helping to lead the California coverage. They do this extraordinary playbook. They do the national playbook, but there's also a California Politico playbook, which everybody should subscribe to for free. It gives you all the most important news in California politics. It's like my Bible that I read every day. Chris helps oversee that and a lot more. Chris Cadelago is here, ladies and gentlemen. Round of applause. Jessica Millan Patterson is the chair of the California Republican Party. When we were with the chair of the national GOP last year, she said that she was the best chair in the country. And she's had extraordinary success in helping to grow the party, especially in some of the down ballot races that we've seen in the last year. Jessica Millan Patterson. Betsy Fischer Martin, as I mentioned, used to be the executive producer of Meet the Press with Tim Russert. She now runs the Institute for Women in Politics and is a leading expert in that space in terms of women in politics and also the media. Betsy Fischer Martin, ladies and gentlemen. And Ed Goeas, got it right? Okay, is a longtime Republican pollster and strategist who has run some of the most successful Republican campaigns around the country. He's flown in for this, so good to see you in LA. Welcome, Ed. Thank you all. So, I thought let's get things started by getting straight to the point. The point of this particular discussion is why did Trump win, and to talk about his historic political comeback. So in the interest of time in our attention-driven economy, if you could, in like a sentence or two, real bottom line, why did Trump win, Chris?
So I came at it very much from the Democratic perspective in terms of our coverage, having been in D.C., covered Harris's first campaign, and then Biden, and then coming on when they switched the nomination. And I think, we talk a lot about Trump and what he did. I'm sure we will on this panel. But from the Democratic perspective, and to pick up from the last panel, a lot of it was people I don't think were hearing about how these policies, and they did roll out a lot of policies. I mean, I think a lot about this, credit for first-time home buyers. But you do look across those, and echoing, what one of the students said, these things just people didn't feel like these applied to them. And I think Trump was going big. Democrats were going very small. They were very involved in sort of small ball process. And I think it just didn't really break through in the way that they hoped it would.
All right, that was a long run-on sentence with lots of commas. So, but smart. Maybe one sentence or two sentences. Why did Trump win?
I think it was because the American people lived through the 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration.
Sounds like a Republican. Betsy.
Since I'm a TV producer, I'm going to give you a quick soundbite from Trump. A vote for Trump will mean your groceries will be cheaper.
Yeah, and the question now is, will that actually happen? Ed.
I am a Republican. I actually came here ready to promote the campaign that Donald Trump won. He won because he ran a better campaign. He won because she won a worse campaign. It's that simple. But I shouldn't have watched his press conference today on the crash. It was embarrassing. And I will say to the group that for a guy that wants to talk all the time about common sense, he shows very little common sense sometimes. And if you want to see what a true president looks like, we just passed the 39th anniversary 2 days ago of the crash of the Challenger. And if you want to see a true president and you want to see a true presidential showing compassion, which is what a president should do at a time like this, watch that speech. It's one of the best speeches showing compassion for the voters and for the tragedy that I've seen my entire time in politics.
So what he's talking about, if you guys didn't see it this morning, President Trump went into the White House briefing room and he blamed the crash likely on DEI. And then he was pressed for evidence of what DEI had to do with it. And he said he didn't have any evidence, but he has common sense, so that it probably has something to do with it, but didn't explain exactly how. And he also blamed potentially the Biden administration, the Obama administration, Pete Buttigieg, at a time when they literally are pulling the bodies out of that water and not all the people have even been identified yet. So Ed, does that sort of go to the idea that Trump can't help himself? The idea.
Yeah, I think some of it is. I'm a good friend of James. I've really liked him for a long time. Certainly like his wife a great deal, and loved their kind of back and forth. I think sometimes James comes across as very negative. But I think one of the problems we have in politics today is both sides are running negative campaigns. What both sides are doing is teaching voters what to be against, not what to be for. And until we get our politicians to start talking about what they're for, which if you look at what James was saying, most of what he was saying was what you should be for as a Democrat, even though he mixes it with his banter, which everyone loves. We have, and my feeling about Trump is I don't talk about him like he's the disease. He's a symptom of where our country is today. And the main thing that our politicians do wrong is that they don't understand basic problem solving. You talk about the problem, you talk about solutions, you create solutions, and that creates new problems. And you always have to stop in that third phase and think about unintended consequences. And what we're suffering from today is the unintended consequences of campaign finance reform in the 90s, Things that came out of it at the same time, but not only super PACs, but social media, cable news, all add to that environment. It's very interesting if you look at turnout in 1990, and I like to look at non-presidential years to see the base. In 1990, 35% of Democrats voted in Democrat primaries and 35% of Republicans voted in Republican primaries. In 2022, it was 17% of Republicans voted in Republican primaries and 15% of Democrats voted in Democrat primaries. The only people voting in our primaries, it's not about their general election. The only people voting in our primaries are far right and far left, and they are picking people that they want to fight over values, not find solutions. And until we start getting people that are going to turn out in the primaries, the centrists, which is 65% of this country, we are not going to correct the problem that we're in.
And a good point. Betsy, you understand political journalism and the media environment as well as anybody. Talk about the way that Trump used the media, thinks about the media, compared to maybe the way that the Democrats use the media, and how in this modern environment that helped change the game a bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, Trump is P.T. Barnum, right? He is
Greatest
a producer's producer. He just, the inauguration a week and a half ago, he's signing what I called his proclamations up at the desk with his pen, right? He plays for the media. And I think that was true during the campaign. The whole notion of let Trump be Trump, unplugged, what we just saw is what we got. None of it's a surprise, right? And, the media is drawn to that. There's no doubt about it. I think that's how he became the nominee in 2016, was he got that initial first pass from the media by putting all of his rallies, back when we did have a primary, right, putting all of that with, zero commentating around it, just because it was getting eyeballs and clicks. And that was the original ascension of him back in 2016. And I think we just saw more of that happen. Yes, there were, certainly attempts to kind of do the fact checking, but he breaks through all of that. And his media strategy this time was, also just to kind of avoid that mainstream media and go to these alternative kind of outlets, the podcasting, we sure can talk more about the bro vote, and, meeting kind of those non-likely voters where they were. No, they're not watching Meet the Press, but they're listening to these various podcasts, and that was their strategy.
Right, and so if you look at the last month and a half of the election, he almost did no mainstream media interviews, and Kamala Harris took so much incoming for not talking to the press, and she was doing a lot of those mainstream media interviews. Right. Trump was almost exclusively going after those podcasts, and he ended up, not really hurting with his base because he had told them all that the media is the enemy. So not talking to the media would be, why would you talk to the enemy, Chris?
And then when she did do The View, as we talked about earlier, she couldn't even answer why she was running.
Most basic,
how she would be different than
most basic question. And you think about this media issue every day too, Chris.
Yeah, and I think, a lot was made about the mediums and where Trump was going. Less was made about what the candidate would actually say when they go on, right? You talk about Kamala Harris, there's so much debate about whether she was going to go on Rogan, whether she wasn't. How was she going to fill those 3 hours? Was it going to be compelling? And then the other piece of it is, you see it now with Trump, he's picked up where he left off. He's got a lot of outlets, a lot of more conservative outlets embedded with his, with ICE folks right now on these raids. They are sort of producing the news, and that sort of access is something that Democrats did when they were doing, initiatives they wanted to do. They had media in there, and so that's what people are seeing. They're seeing Dr. Phil out there in Chicago on these raids, and that stuff is breaking through. It continues to break through.
It gets into the social media stream of everybody.
And half of his cabinet are all people that were on Fox News Channel. So some people say that that's a negative, but there's also a positive in that they all are good on TV and know how to communicate a message, right? I want to get Jessica in here real quick. Jessica, maybe give us some of the numbers, because from a California perspective, for so long, Donald Trump was seen as the boogeyman, that even associating with him would hurt you. Look at the way that Adam Schiff treated Steve Garvey in the primary, which we did all together here at USC during the primary debate. But he wasn't so much a boogeyman for a lot of Republicans in this state in the last election.
No, and we certainly saw from the beginning of my chairmanship in February of 2019 going into that 2020 cycle. And we really focused on California issues and individual district issues. We didn't talk about what was going on the national scene. And you would often hear me say, the president is campaigning in 11 states not named California. What we are focused on is making sure that we get the House, which is what we did in 2020 and 22. Picking up, even with Donald Trump at the top of the ballot in 2020, we picked up 4 congressional seats. Some of those seats President Trump lost by double digits. Fast forward to 2024, and we lost a congressional district that Donald Trump won by 5 points. So it changed significantly because of what people were experiencing in the 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration. We also saw a huge tick in the voter registration and the movement. When I took over as chair in February of 2019, we were essentially the 3rd largest party in the state. More people were choosing decline to state than were choosing Republican in 2019. We rolled up our sleeves. By May of 2020, we got that 2nd place spot back. But what's most interesting is what's taken place since 2022. Since 2022 midterms, California Republicans have out-registered Democrats by 5.5 times. We've out-registered decline to states by 9.5 times. In that almost 6-year period, we've registered almost 1 million new Republicans. That's despite more people leaving our state than coming in here. We saw the movement in Trump's numbers here in California. He flipped or moved to the right 57 out of the 58 counties compared to 2020. Kamala Harris, a California Democrat, did worse in every single county.
That's astounding.
In every single legislative district, every single congressional district, it moved to the right.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that a lot of it had to do with California Democrats being in charge of everything here and failing many Californians. Whether it was public safety, where we saw all 58 counties, Alex, when in our lifetime have all 58 counties agreed on a proposition?
Yeah, and she's talking about Proposition 36, which was a pushback to Prop 47. Prop 36 was something that was opposed by all of the top statewide Democrats, opposed by the governor, opposed by the speaker, by the Senate President pro tem. A few Democratic mayors, who I think were smart politically, realized that this would be bad, and they agreed with it, but most Democrats opposed it, and yet it won by 70+%? Yeah. With the whole entire state saying, we disagree with you, Governor, on this?
And not only did Democrats give them a lot of reasons, but Republicans started to show up. These were things that I wanted to focus on in my chairmanship. We had ceded entire communities to the Democrat Party, and my community was not thriving because of any of the policies. In fact, by any milestone that you would look at, safer streets, better jobs, better education for our children, we were getting none of that. And we had to show up in these communities and make people feel like they were welcome in our party.
And you're the polling guy. Can you talk about just nationwide also in terms of the shifts that we're seeing in demographics that you noticed, whether you like them or not, in terms of Trump?
The shifts are a false read. And it's very important for everyone to understand. In this election, he ran a good campaign. He took the get out the vote that's normally with the party, and he put it into a private operation that he understood. And he registered and identified, just like you did in California, registered and identified more Republicans and turned them out. In this election, he won by 2 million votes. He increased his vote by 3 million votes. But Harris declined in the vote that Biden had gotten by 6 million. I guarantee you that 3 million didn't come from the 6 million. It came from new Republicans voting. And the 6 million were disenchanted Republicans, disenchanted independents, and for him, but also with Biden, and more specifically with Harris. And so what percent of the vote you got is distorted because it's based on election turnout polls. And so they are identifying if all the Democratic vote dropped off, and it was very heavily in black votes, very heavily in Hispanic vote, very heavily in youth vote, that meant that his percentage he was getting with those groups went up in comparison to what turned out on the other side, not what he got in 2020.
And Betsy, you focus on the women issue, and this was supposed to be the saving grace of the Democratic Party, abortion. That was going to be the big thing that drove turnout. We saw that it had driven turnout in the midterms after Roe v. Wade was overturned. What did we end up seeing on that front?
I mean, I thought we would be seeing kind of the largest gender gap ever. That did not turn out, right? And what happened was the gender gap was smaller in this election cycle, which was really surprising to me, than it was, in previous elections, even with Biden and Hillary. And so, I think Trump. Look, when you look at the difference between men and women, the biggest gender gap that you saw were those young voters. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about young voters in other panels too, but you saw that big disparity between young women and young men when it came to the election. And I think on the abortion issue, look, Trump, basically went out there and said he was not going to be for a national abortion ban, and he was leaving it up to the states, and that helped him sort of quell what we saw post-Dobbs in 2022. And he didn't suffer at all with sort of the more conservative evangelical voters. That support didn't waver at all. And so you saw that gender gap that did not, if the gender gap would have been a couple of more points, the election would have been different.
Yeah,
But again, you have to go back to who voted.
Yes.
And it's going to take us a while to figure out, of the 6 million, did they vote before and didn't vote this time? And of the 3 million more he got, did they not vote last time and vote this time? Which is going to distort all those figures.
Yeah.
And I saw no indication in the polling that the women that were incensed over the abortion issue were not still voting Democrat. They didn't go and vote for him all of a sudden. They maybe stayed at home.
Right.
Or he increased the vote of the ones
And
that
he
wasn't
increased
an
his
issue.
margins among men
Right. Right.
significantly, especially non-college educated men.
And then you get to this question, Chris, that when you think about when Barack Obama was running, that's when I was here at USC. The Democrats were the cool kids. That was the party you wanted to hang out with. John McCain was not the cool kid. God bless him, right? Mitt Romney was not seen as the cool kid. It was, even the Obama bros, that was a thing. And what the hell happened? How did Trump become the cool kid?
Harris had a chance here. I mean, there was a month-long period, maybe even longer. She was up in some of these polls. I know the campaign has gone and done their media tour and talked about how she was always kind of trying to come back up. I mean, she had leads there. She had leads in some of these states. The decision she made not to give these younger voters, these voters who were looking for something, any kind of daylight between her and Biden, I think was just crushing for her. The fact that she was not able to break away on any of these key issues, even if it wasn't a significant break, even if it was a rhetorical break, she just was unwilling to do that. And I think a lot of these voters saw that and were just dispirited by it. I mean, you saw the drop-off in the activity online from the height of the brat summer to where the campaign ended up. And so, they gave her a chance. They really gave her a look.
But people voted for Biden 4 years ago because they thought he was a centrist, not that they thought he was a progressive. And his policies all through his presidency had moved far to the left in terms of what they were doing. And the reason why she couldn't distance herself from it, because there was a question, was it her policies versus his policy?
They also thought he was going to be a bridge, right? That didn't turn out to be the case either.
Right, because it puts her in a weird box. Because if she says she disagrees with the policy, then it's like, why didn't he listen to you?
Exactly.
Right, and then you already probably have some challenges as being a woman and a woman of color. Of are you being respected in this administration? Are you being listened to? Are you just being put in there for different reasons? And so does that make you look weak if on every issue you made your point and nobody cared and they didn't listen to you?
But again, was it her policies?
Right.
And when she was asked that question, there were two very simple things she could have done that would have changed things. One is she could have said, I did what any vice president's supposed to do, what Mike Pence did. I supported the president and his policies, And what I was not confronted with that Mike Pence was, is being asked by the president to do something that was illegal. That would have taken the press off on a tangent and not focused on what she just said. Or she could have said, I was a United States Senator from California and I viewed issues from a California view. But after 4 years of being vice president, I see it now as a national view. And yes, there are some things I would probably do different.
Yeah.
Both of those would have been so much better answers than no.
Or I learned, right? I was vice president. I went across the country. I got to talk to people. I had this incredible opportunity. And so my perspective has changed.
But the Biden White House didn't give her an opportunity to shine
that's
at all when she was vice president.
And that's the question. Did Joe Biden quietly, privately, give her space to go after him? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you know. If there was any, like, I know you're going to have to hit me on this and go for it and we won't say it, you know. Was there any of that going on?
She already had one strike against him on going against him by running in the first place and what they manufactured.
Not only that, but early on, she decided, I mean, this was mentioned earlier, but when you decide to basically inherit his entire campaign structure and those folks who are running the campaign, and then you supplement it with a few other people, you've set yourself up, you set yourself on that path. She made that decision fairly early, and that crew was not a crew that was, going to break from Biden or necessarily, or do anything approaching kind of throwing him under the bus in a way that would, that might have needed to be done to break away from it. I mean, his numbers were very bad at that point.
They loved and respected Biden. He was their guy, right? So in terms of California, because this is the area of your expertise, what does Kamala Harris' loss potentially mean for the prospect of another Democratic candidate from California, or her? Is the party now at a place where they think, okay, California is the land of soups and nuts, or whatever it's, or fruits and nuts is what I've heard them call it in Texas, and we don't want to go there, let's stay away from that? Or do you think that there's a prospect for her, for Newsom, or for others from California going forward?
I think it depends a lot on the individual. I don't know that you look at the last candidate being from a particular state, but just to go to some of Jessica's points, I think in California, what I've seen is there's a lot of folks out there, we've seen it with the fires, they're sort of starved for competence in government. They want government to do these basic things. And I think that's the idea that's taken hold, certainly nationally, is that that's not happening in California. And that's the sort of thing that can harm a candidate who's coming out of here, is are they doing the basics?
Right. And how do you think about that, Jessica, going forward? As you know, because we have not had a statewide Republican win since 2006, despite all of the problems that you articulate about a one-party rule. Is it leaning into Trump? Is it leaning into a more moderate thing? Do you get behind somebody like Caruso, who now says he's a Democrat? But how, and maybe take back off in terms of the rate? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I do think of it in exciting terms. I would love to see Gavin Newsom run for president. I would talk about it every single day. And I'd love to continue to shine lights on the absolute incompetence here in California. But I think for Republicans, I think what we do need, certainly we're moving in the right direction, however slow it may be. Do I think we're at a turning point? I don't know yet. I feel like so many catastrophic and large-scale failures have happened here in California, and I don't think Californians have gotten to that point yet. And I think what it's really going to take is a big leader that can come in on the Republican ticket and do that.
Right, and the last you had was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who obviously was larger than life in every way possible, and he broke through so many different molds. But you have thoughts, yeah?
Yeah, I want to go back to our country is in deep trouble. And it's not one party or the other, it's our country is in deep trouble. And one of the things that's happened through 3 decades of doing nothing but focusing on negative campaigns is trust in every one of our institutions in this country as an all-time low except for our military. Used to be the military and police 6 years ago, now it's only the military that has very high. So whether you look at big business, big government, small business, unions, healthcare, media,
always
religion.
at the bottom. Always at the bottom.
Yeah.
I mean, no, but they're all at an all-time low.
Local
and the
news
problem
people
with that is it's made our voters very cynical. And the problem with cynical voters is cynical voters are very susceptible to demagoguery. Whether it's demagoguery on social media, demagoguery on cable news, demagoguery from our candidates. And if we don't start doing something to build trust in our country's institutions, we'll never build trust on either side for the candidates.
But is the reason why there's been so many negative campaigns is because it works. It's the same reason why there's so much negative news on the news at night, because when we do positive news, nobody watches it.
No offense, but, and I always upset my friends who are in the media. My response to that is, so does positive. You ought to try it once in a while.
Yeah.
And I have built an entire career on running positive campaigns. And I watch people who is ultimately one of the best candidates I ever had, James Langford, who actually,
Senator from
because he was so positive, to be able to put together a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to get an issue for the border.
Right.
And then you had Donald Trump. It was such a serious issue. Why say kill it now so I could campaign on it 8 months later? Call bullshit on that kind of thing when candidates say that kind of thing. That's how you get over it. But positive works, especially when it comes to, one of the biggest problems we've had from the 90s, one of the other problems, and it was brought by Newt Gingrich when he took the voting down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, and members of Congress stopped bringing their families to Washington. I used to, when my kids were growing up, I coached basketball, I coached baseball, and there was always a congressman from the Democrat side and the Republican side sitting in the bleachers cheering for their kids. They don't do that anymore. They leave their families at home. They don't do anything to actually get to know each other.
So what's the positive message? If you were running one right now, what is that message and how does that poll?
The positive message is be for the things you're for and begin to rebuild trust in our institutions. And look, populism was always based on being against big government, big religion, big media, big business. And back in the early days, we used to always want to be against more of the bigs than the other side was against the bigs. That was the beginning of negative campaigns. But we used to be able to run negative campaigns. Run campaigns against negative campaigns and make the issue they're running a negative campaign the issue.
Yeah.
And we can't anymore.
Chris?
I think it's still very TBD in terms of where it goes post-Trump. I mean, you could see sort of two competing, not only for the different states Democrats are going to look to win, but just kind of even sort of overall themes of these campaigns. Are Democrats going to look for someone more Trump-like? Basically this like a fighter type who's going to campaign in that way, or is it going to be closer to 2020, something Biden I think capitalized, which is sort of a healer, someone who's going to come into the country and basically say we're going to bring you guys together. And I think it could go either way at this point.
It seemed to me that in 2022, Gavin Newsom thought that Joe Biden wasn't going to run. And if you watched his activities then, which you and I both did closely, he kept on talking about fighting. Where the hell is the Democratic Party? When the Roe v. Wade went down, where's the party fighting back? All his language online was all about fighting because he thought, to your point, Ed, that you got to get to the Democratic base, which wants to see a fighter, and that is how he was going to differentiate himself from the old nice guy who got run over, essentially. And then Democrats did just well enough for Biden to stay in the race, and then Newsom's boxed out, so he now has to hug Biden and say he's his best friend, so that way Harris doesn't get in there, and that way, which could box him out. But it seemed like that was the calculus of at least one aspect of a lane, and maybe he's trying to do that again right now.
Yeah, and the problem for the Democrats now is the fighting posture is where a lot of them are being told to be. They're the opposition party. They're the party out of power. So that's what they should do. Now, what they pick to fight on is, a very important a separate subset, which is do they focus on these things that voters just don't care a whole lot about? I mean, firing attorneys in D.C., is that something that, someone's sitting at their table thinking about, this really affects me? It might be very important for the future of democracy, but it might not be something that really resonates. And then where do they go from there? So I think now, and then at the same time, you have some of these folks who frankly, and this has not gotten as much coverage at the moment, have been kind of neutralized in how much they can fight because of their elected officials who have a lot of problems in their own states, in their own cities. And so how far are they going to go out there hitting Trump when they're supposed to be doing their job at home?
Yeah.
And people are looking for them to do the current job rather than focus on the next.
And you had a big fire and you have tens of billions that you need from the federal government.
They also need to be a little bit more sophisticated in understanding Trump's strategy. Trump's strategy right now is to do all these executive orders, knowing that a good deal of them are going to go down in the courts. And he benefits from both. Because first of all, he states what he's for. He passes a good deal of things, so it goes through. And the ones that get thrown out by the court, he then uses it with his base to say, see, that's one of the things we're against.
Yeah, Betsy, what do you think is the smart media strategy that Democrats can learn from what Trump has done well?
Well, I mean, you see Trump right now. I mean, he's flooding the zone, right? I mean, where does the media start? I mean, on any given day, I'm sure you're in your newsroom, like, what do I even talk about this, right?
Yeah.
There's so
I mean, on day
much.
one, we're covering at the inauguration 200 executive orders.
Yeah, like, where do you start with that?
How do you do that in a minute 30?
Yeah. And I think that is the Trump strategy right now, like flooding that zone. And so there is not one thing that gets picked up on and the spotlight is not shown. I mean, do you start with like the crypto, tokens, or like what do you even start with here? Yeah. And that's I think is very difficult for the media, and we're just going to continue to see that.
But in terms of Democrats using the media or social media or getting their message out, maybe independent of the media, what are the lessons that can be?
I mean, I think it's like what did not work last time, let's not rinse, wash, and repeat on it, right? And so you had Democrats who their message during the campaign was all about the fight, all about anti-Trump, Trump. And that's not what people, to Chris's point, not necessarily what people really cared about. They cared about those groceries at the end of the day, not the trials, not the felony counts, none of that. And so they care about what affects them. And so if Democrats want to have a message, it needs to be about what they're doing to help people. And it's that competence factor that we talked about.
It goes back to they need to campaign. I mean, take everything James said earlier. Yeah. It's about campaigning on what you're for, not campaigning on what you're against. And that's how you begin building and rebuilding, because 65% of this country is centrist.
Yeah.
65%. The problem is the 35% is who's voting in the two primaries. Stop letting that define who you are as a party and start looking at the centrists.
And Jessica, another smart thing James talked about was the idea of picking which things to focus on. So for you now as a party chairman, when you got 200 executive orders and you got to pick and choose which ones to focus on, what are you focused on right now as the message for this state and for the people running in this state?
Well, in California, we'll continue to focus on California things. And that's because that is where we are finding our success. When we're talking to people about their gas prices, when we're talking about now we're going through this whole, it's going to be a recovery and a rebuilding situation here. For the last several years, we've been able to talk about crime. Los Angeles County decided to vote out their very liberal district attorney because of the policies that California Democrats have championed. So we will continue to focus on California things and utilize President Trump in the excitement, enthusiasm that he brings to certain parts of our state.
Chris?
In terms of,
I know you were just trying to weigh in on the last issue in terms of messaging and what are the big issues going forward?
Yeah, I look really closely at how Democrats have been messaging around these cabinet appointees and these hearings. And a heavy focus is still on these character deficiencies that they think these nominees have. Less so on less of an emphasis on the qualifications, less of an emphasis on basically, whether they could do the job, and more on who these people are, foibles in their background. That stuff has just not worked. It didn't work with Trump, and it's now not working with these nominees. Clearly, they don't have the votes. If you don't have the votes, you can still use that opportunity to try to sort of make some gains on that side. And it so far on that, it hasn't happened. Now on this OMB directive and a whole bunch of spending in there, Democrats, I think, have sort of corrected a little bit, and they're talking more about these specific programs, and that might have been something that has like jump-started the party in some way to start to focus on things people are thinking about, but it hadn't happened up to then.
Ed, I'm curious because you obviously were a huge part of the party before Trump and sort of understand the old school grand old party.
Right.
And there are a lot of people that you worked closely with that probably weren't huge Trump fans privately, but have now supported him publicly. Have you noticed that they've changed at all in the last few years, that this time around they maybe see him differently? What's the private conversation like?
It goes back to a variety of things, but it goes back to those primary voters.
Yeah.
That no matter where they may be in terms of where they want to be in terms of issues, they know that they have to pass the test with those primary voters. And we asked a very interesting survey question over the years. And in fact, we asked it independently at first. We asked, do you want your member of Congress to fight over values even if it means they get no solutions? 71% said yes. We asked that same group of 1,000 people, do you want your member of Congress to compromise their values in order to find common ground and find solutions to your problems? 75% of that same group, this is 71% said yes. Now, one thing I've always said to my clients is voters sometimes hold contradictory opinions and they hate the hell out of it if you point it out to them. But when we asked it as a forced choice, 27% voted, I want to fight over values, not over solutions. And 67% said, compromise on values to find common ground, to find solutions to our problems. It's interesting that 27% makes up who's voting in our primaries. We need to stop letting primary voters dictate to us what type of candidates we have. And if we don't do that, and the way to answer that is to start voting in primaries. Don't emphasize voting in general elections. Emphasize voting in primaries. So the nominee that you have to vote for in the general election represents where you really are.
Yeah.
And what you really want.
Forgive my ignorance on this because I don't know the answer to this. Is Senator Langford facing a primary challenge?
Probably.
Yeah, so let's go into this example because I think it's interesting. So Senator Langford, as he talked about, was the guy behind this bipartisan immigration bill. Senator Langford, a very conservative Republican in a very conservative state of Oklahoma. A lot of Trump people were very mad at him for trying to do a deal with the Democrats. He now faces potentially a primary challenge. What is his message? What's your advice to him in that situation? Because you literally have a real world example of this.
Look, the biggest mistake that has been made is talking about the border problem, which is a real problem, as an immigration problem. It's not. Our immigration policies in this country have been broken for 40 years. And the reason why we have the border problem is we don't have enough people coming in legally. We only allow 1.2 million a year. It is not matching what we need for our economy. And we need to have a system to bring in people that really want to be a part of this country, not just want to take advantage of the jobs that are here. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing that happened in the last 2 years is we were beginning to move towards a real discussion on fixing immigration, and all of a sudden the border became the issue, and combined is the same issue. They are two separate issues. And if the Democrats want to know something to do here, is when we do fix the border problem, then's the time to start going after, let's fix immigration in this country.
What's the message for Langford? He gets a Republican primary challenge. What's the bumper sticker that you advise him?
It's going to be exactly that. And luckily, he has another senator in the state who is willing to kind of step forward and give him some cover. And that's going to help.
Okay. I want to go around the horn with a couple quick rapid-fire questions, and then in a moment we're going to do Q&A as well, so start thinking about what you might want to ask. I like one-word answers, so let's try to have some fun with this. So one word to describe Donald Trump as president so far.
Fast.
I'll go last.
You go last. Okay, Jessica.
Fast. Loud.
Me?
Yeah.
A salesman.
I'll say predictable.
Predictable. Interesting. So you're saying nothing that he's done, he's told you everything was, promises made, promises kept.
The tweet he had last night after the plane crash was something that he's been doing for more than a decade, basically. He's been sitting there spouting off on whatever's on the news, whatever's on TV, doing it as president, doing it out of office, same thing. You could have written that tweet or truth post before you even saw it.
All right, now we'll do another one word. One word to describe the Democratic Party right now.
Perfect. Confused.
In a wilderness.
That was more than one word.
Okay.
I agree with the confused and the
Okay.
rudderless.
Rudderless. Who is most likely to be the Democratic Party nominee in 2028? Chris, you go first. You don't always get to be
I'm
last.
sitting that one out. I'm
Okay.
pleading the fifth.
Shapiro.
I would agree with that.
Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania.
I actually think the one that I see out there with the potential to grab the medal is the governor of Kentucky.
Governor of Kentucky, Andy
Really,
Beshear,
really, really good.
who's very popular in a very Republican state. That would be, on paper, somebody that would be appealing, certainly, to the.
No Wes Moores.
Yeah.
Governor
Did you just
of Maryland.
add
No,
him?
this is not mine, but
And there was no.
I don't mind to come up.
Let me do this. Who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now? Who is the face of the Democratic Party?
Mr. Nobody.
Nobody.
No.
Nobody has an. Is it Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat leader? No. Nobody thinks that there is a leader of the Democrat. That's a problem, right? But I guess we've seen this in the past. I mean, you think of examples. Betsy, think about 2005 when George W. Bush had won. Republicans had control of everything.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, Nancy Pelosi takes over as Speaker. 2 years after that, Barack
Comes
Obama.
this guy, Barack Obama.
Right, comes in
Like,
and
yeah.
huge Democratic majorities in the Senate and the House. So sometimes it can change pretty quickly. Thoughts, any questions here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Are we doing mics or are we not? I don't know. You can talk
Comes
loud. What's your name, sir?
Baby, I'm Steve Cohen.
Hi, Steve Cohen. How are you?
So I want to talk about two sides of the same coin, which is the failure of our
Here we go.
education system.
This is Steve Cohen asking a question about education. Go ahead.
So I want to talk about we just found out that students have not recovered from the pandemic 3 or 4 years ago. Can they read? Can they add and subtract?
Yes.
We aren't educating our kids to figure out how to deal with social media. And to me, the elephant in the room right now, despite everything you guys said, is that social media won this election. We have the two biggest trolls are Trump and Musk. And they're dominating social media. And we, as Democrats, can't fight back. And the question I have for everybody the whole day is, how do we fight back?
Yeah, and you think about, Joe Biden in his final speech talked about an oligarchy led by tech bros, and a lot of the Republicans were all scoffing at that. And then you see at the inauguration the richest people in the world who are all tech bros who are right there in front, which maybe gives you a sense that they. But you think about it, and anybody jump in here, but you think about that used to be advantage Democrats, right? Barack Obama was thought of as the Facebook election and that he used that so effectively, and now it seems to have flipped. Anybody want to weigh in on the biggest issue of our time?
He likes to call himself a great communicator. I work for the great communicator, Ronald Reagan. And I watched him when Trump wants to talk about how big he won this election by, he's the biggest victory in 50 years. He needs to remember Reagan, who won 49 states and 515 electoral votes. And I used to brief him once a month when I was Congressional Committee National Campaign Director. And I grew up with a speech impediment. And I walked in every month. I did it for 2 years, and I had 30 minutes. And I was scared to death. My speech impediment, and I was only 30-something. And he would take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and talk to me, tell jokes. And he had a sense of telling when I had calmed down, and then he said, okay, what do you have to tell me? And he never once said, this is a waste of my time, cut it to 15 minutes or 10 minutes. But I saw that of the sign of the man who truly had compassion who truly understood people. Many of you may have disagreed with the policies that he had, but he understood people and he played to that.
But would he even have a home in the current Republican Party? I mean, that was a different area and a different media universe.
He does, because I'm still in the Republican Party.
Okay.
But it's the result of everything that has happened since the 90s.
Right. Starting with Gingrich and
the party is driven by the extremes. Both parties.
But to his question, which is a good question, anybody want to jump in on this, in terms of winning over social media, which is the main way that everybody is experiencing information these days?
There is no media literacy of students these days. I mean, they don't understand the difference between what's getting shown up in their feed and, you know, an opinion column in the newspaper, right? Like, it's just all there, and they don't understand how to check sources. I mean, on social media, there is no editor, right? Everything is getting through, and there's no time to check and see where did that come from, right. You know? And they see it, and I mean, I'm the mother of a 23-year-old, and look, I see it with her. She'll send me stuff. Where did you hear about this? Oh, I just saw it on social media. That's the answer? Right? That's the answer. I saw it on social media. Well, where is it from on social media? Oh, let me look here. Oh, it's a MAGA something site. Well, let's figure out where that's coming from, right? And so we are just not doing a good enough job in teaching our young people how to look at sources, how to figure out, cut through all of the garbage that they're getting.
But it's
an addictive problem too, just sitting there scrolling. It's
that's a problem
productivity
on
issue.
The parents, not on our society.
I have a 15-year-old. It can be both, right?
And my 15-year-old's response to me the day after the election is, that's all right, it's only 4 more years. But that's a pretty informed statement.
I don't know. It seems to me that we might want to have some media literacy classes.
Yes.
Might be just as important as physics or chemistry or all the rest of it. Or we don't need to know calculus all the time, but media literacy is something everybody needs. But that's my take. All right. Other questions? And we could spend an hour just doing that question. But yes. Yes, ma'am. Hold on one sec. Kami's going to bring you the mic.
Mike.
And feel free to please introduce yourself.
Hi. My name is Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
Lifelong Democrat. Regarding the extremes controlling the parties and the primary being the problem, last time I was here, I think you were here at that event, there was someone speaking about reforming primaries.
Yeah.
Do you remember him, Nick something?
Yeah, from Colorado.
So what about reforming the primaries? And the thing I know the most about is ranked choice voting. What about that?
I think there's some experiments going on that. Again, the real issue is there's other things aggravating it. Super PACs are aggravating it because they think their only job is to run negative campaigns directed at those primary voters. The party having less money today than more because they took it away from them in the under the auspices of cleaning up dark money. And in fact, they created a worse avenue for dark money. And so, you know, I remember back in, you know, the late 80s, early 90s, our strategy was always to look from the very beginning of the campaign, not the primaries separately than the general election, but where do we need to be to get 50% plus one of the vote? Not in the primary, but in the general election. Now that question doesn't even come up until after the primary is over.
We've got open primaries here in California, which is not true in every state. I'm curious, Jessica, your thoughts on this in terms of how it works. So basically, the only primary that's closed is the presidential primary. That is only open to Republicans. Democrats open up their primary to everybody, but every other primary is open to what's called a top 2 system, where anybody, whether you're Republican or Democrat, can vote for anybody, and the top 2 advance could be Democrat-Republican, could be Republican-Republican, Democrat-Republican. How do you think it's working?
Not great. I mean, the thought behind it when Prop 14 was passed was to get to your point, more centrist candidates. And you're not changing the electorate, though. It's the same people voting in the primaries. So you're still getting the extremes usually of both party. What you end up sometimes is in an incredibly deep blue district or an incredibly deep red district, you will get 2 candidates of the same party. So sometimes you'll get a moderate Democrat, and then they go through TSA and go up to Sacramento, and they vote with the party line on everything, and really nothing gets solved anyway.
But if you ask about the rank order voting, which Alaska went to, the interesting thing about that process is that when you had a bunch of candidates running and knowing the top two are going to run against each other, what it did take away from is negative campaigning as much. Because they didn't want to be negative campaigning.
You have to be liked in order to get.
Huh?
You have to be liked to get.
Liked, and you wanted to make sure that you weren't running a negative campaign against someone you may need their votes if they get knocked out, not being the top two.
And ranked choice, for people that might not know, is that you rank your choice. So instead of just voting for Chris, you say, I like Chris the best, but I like Jessica second best, and I like Betsy third best, and then people are eliminated, and instead of having as many it all gets figured out somehow.
There's a great documentary that's out I saw a couple months ago called Majority Rules about ranked choice voting in Alaska, if anybody wants to check it out. It's well done.
Any of the students have a question? I want to give you guys first. Yes. Please tell us your name.
My name is Lawrence. I'm currently a senior studying international relations.
Very
and
nice.
I just want to first push back on the notion that sort of like Generation Z and the youth are uninformed. Now, certainly I've seen some of my peers that are, less informed. I think that there's certainly some truth in the idea that there probably could be a little more media literacy for my generation, but at least from my personal experience, I think it's less of Generation Z and the young people being less informed, and more the idea that we've lost trust in our legacy media and our main institutions, right? Whether it be right the mainstream, what we call the mainstream media, ABC, NBC, CBS. It feels like some of my peers, and honestly me too, I feel like we have lost the trust. We have lost trust in we've lost the belief that our institutions will actually speak up for us and do what is right. And so we're starting to gravitate towards social media and alternative outlets, bloggers, podcasters, et cetera, which Trump used to great extent to win the votes of young straight males who have sort of felt disillusioned and left out of the Democratic Party and the liberal Gen Z quote unquote mainstream.
Right.
So with that being said, how will legacy institutions, and for those of you on stage, how will your respective stakeholders and organizations that you represent, I guess, try and reach out to Generation Z? Because on the left, many young people, especially here at USC, we've had big pro-Palestinian protests, a lot of anger against the Democratic Party for not being more pro-Palestinian. Meanwhile, I've had many young male friends who are disillusioned by the Democratic Party, that were cheering when Trump won.
Sure.
They're like, masculinity is back, and yeah.
So I want to answer your question, but I want to ask you a question before. Where do you get your news?
I get my news from. I still watch a lot of legacy media. I'm a big fan of Politico, just because.
Good answer.
Shout out to their graphics team; they do a really good job.
And what would make you trust legacy media more?
I think if legacy media started not just focusing on like the main headline, the main issues in America, but also like delve deeper into like investigative piece of reporting on, perhaps different scandals and different really just poking at the deeper problems that oftentimes people just want to dance around or use like vague political terms.
Would you be willing to pay for that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I
I
pay for the LA Times. I pay for Wall Street Journal.
Way to go. Okay, because that's part of the issue. Okay, thank you. Well, Chris, as the Politico guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do think that there's, obviously you have to, if you believe in these things, obviously you have to sort of tell people why these various institutions are important and what they actually mean. So it gets back to your literacy piece. But I also think from the perspective of media, I've seen this just huge backlash. This might be COVID, this might be everything since, but there's a real distrust, not just of these institutions, but the quote unquote experts. Right?
Yeah.
I think young people in particular, they're like, what does this person really know? You know, are they really the expert? They're saying this thing now, and there's so much stock being put in what these experts are saying at any given time. They're seeing some of that, not all of it, some of it clearly proven wrong in a fairly short period of time. And that, I think, is undermining a lot of the trust they have, and it's backfiring on the press that is laying so much on these folks who are seen as the authority.
So how do you think about it from a business strategy? You're helping to run Politico's business strategy in attracting him and the other people back here and getting them to buy your product.
I mean, I think we, not to sound too much like a homer here, but I think we do a lot of that type of reporting. We have the day-to-day political reporting. We have very deep policy reporting. That relies on really what's going on, really tries to incorporate who's on all sides of these things, how they're taking it on. And so I mean, there is a lot of, you have to sort through, of course, you always have. There is a lot of good stuff out there. And I think, I guess the message is for outside of our own outlet, if you do see things that you think are effective, outlets that you think are doing it well, you have to pay for it. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Investigative reporting is expensive and hard.
Expensive.
And to my point, I'll speak on behalf of what I'm trying to do, is be aware that people may not come to you where you want them to come to you. You have to go where they are. So I spend a lot of time putting together Instagram reels and TikToks and other things, and realizing that can't just be a clip of the news. It's got to be its own thing. And some people say, I went on TMZ yesterday. Like, there's different places where you can communicate with different people. And I think the legacy media needs to get out of the headspace of let's do everything like it's 1985 and start communicating to people like it's 2025, and go to people and also be more conversational. To that point about experts, I don't think people want to be lectured at. They want to have a conversation with people. They want to learn. They want to be included. And so that old school model, I think, just doesn't work anymore. Ed, I know you had your hand up, and I think that might be the last
The lack of trust is something I made a point of earlier. They all have it. And I wrote a book with Celinda Lake, a Democrat pollster, called A Question of Respect. And we had been asking a survey question about our youth, on do you believe that our youth may be the future on a more civil future? And the numbers were over 50%. And not only were youth very strong on that, seniors were very strong on that. Millennials were upside down negative. And so you have a generation right above you that is fueling some of that negativism that is there. The disappointing thing we had in the book is when we finally got to the last chapter on hope, and we did interviews with young people, whether they were college educated, not college educated, by gender, by race, they all said the same thing. I will respect others if they respect me first. And we're living in a society today that no one respects anyone else.
Yeah.
And so they are not being fed that. The final conclusion we came to is we needed people like, for me, a Ronald Reagan or a John McCain, who showed me real respect for others. We don't have that today. Our politicians aren't showing that for each other. So who's going to lead our young people to be in the right position of civility, of respect, and dealing with issues in a respectful way where we do find common ground so we can actually get some solutions for our problems in this country.
And we'll end on that, because what the USC Center for the Political Future is all about is what you're talking about, is this idea of being here. And the fact that you all are here supporting a civil discussion, learning from people of different parties, we need more of this. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening to us. We look forward to talking to you more at lunch. We got great programming later on. Enjoy your meal. We'll see you in a little bit.